And we are recording. This is the Rob Kall bottom-up show doing video and audio. You can go to YouTube and search for Rob Kall bottom-up show to find this interview if you're listening to the audio. And my guest tonight is Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. He was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy and Associate Editor of the Wall Street Journal. He was columnist for Business Week, Scripps Howard News Service, and Creator Syndicate. He's had many university appointments. His internet columns have attracted a worldwide following. And his latest books are The Failure of Laissez-Faire, Capitalism, and Economic Dissolution of the West, How America Was Lost, and The Neoconservative Threat to World Order. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you, Rob. Always a pleasure to be on with you.
Same here. So let's start off by talking about your website. Your site was, along with my site, OpEdNewscom, listed by ProperNot.com, which the Washington Post highlighted as a Russian propaganda site. What's your response, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, Rob, that it did me more good than harm. I think what's happened is that the print and TV media have discredited themselves. They've lost control of the explanations, which means that the ruling elites, including the CIA, which speak through the print and TV media, that they've lost control of the explanations that are given to the American people. I think more and more people turn to the independent internet media like Op-Ed News, like my site, like a large number of others. And so in an effort to regain control of explanations by discrediting the alternative media, this unknown group, I still not heard exactly who they are, produced this list of alternative media that they tried to delegitimize by associating them with Russia, which has been demonized. So the demonized Russia, that became the way they had something to hook us to discredit us. I don't think it worked. I think what it did was to tell people where they could go to get better explanations. And so I think that's what's happened. There was a lot of anger among some of the listed sites, and there were going to be lawsuits, and the Washington Post was asked for explanations. But I think on the whole, it's gone away because I don't really think it hurt anybody. I think it actually helped. My readership went up.
So has ours, actually. Although I also think that could be because we're the opposition to the Trump, I guess. So who knows?
Well, I don't understand the opposition so early. I think you have to see what happens. And I, myself, would be very uncomfortable being aligned with the ruling elites against Trump. I don't see how this benefits the liberal left progressive to be aligned with the CIA and John Brennan and Hillary and the neoconservatives and the Republican warmongers like John McCain and Lindsey Graham. But maybe you can explain later why you liberal progressive left guys want to be aligned with them against a guy who claims he's looking after the interests of the working class.
And you've written in one of your recent articles, the easiest way for a president to, quote, lead, end quote, is to accommodate the agendas of the powerful interest groups. Is this what the left wants Trump to do? If not, why is the left helping the interest groups to force Trump into this role? I had that saved to discuss with you. So you brought it up. So, the way I look at it, though, is I look at the appointments and I look at the actions that Trump takes. And what I'm saying is Trump is appointing a bunch of really powerful people, and the kind of routine right-wingers that you would expect Reince Priebus to appoint. So I don't see the big change yet. Although the one thing, he did void out or put the final nail in the coffin of the TPP, which is a good thing, which progressives also supported. So that was good. But, an awful lot of what he's done, I see from his appointments, all those billionaires, all those people who oppose taking care of the environment and things like that. So how do you see that as siding with the establishment?
Well, in this way, I think what you're overlooking is that if you're going to get any change from the top, you can't have a bunch of sissies. You can't have Presbyterian ministers. You can't have the uninitiated. The only way you can bring any change is to have savvy, connected, smart, tough people. Otherwise, you get run over. And you have to say, well, who could he appoint as Secretary of Treasury that doesn't know the banking world, that doesn't know Wall Street? Whoever he puts there that doesn't know that is going to get run over. If he wants to change the fundamental structure of foreign policy and stop having the neoconservative agenda imposing American hegemony on the world, which is what he says. He says we're not here to impose ourselves on the world. He's got to have somebody who knows the intelligence community, who knows all the players in the foreign policy establishment, and that's who he chose. He chose the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, a lieutenant general, yes. But this is the general, Rob, who went on television and said publicly that it was all a bunch of BS about ISIS just happening to show up in Syria. He said the Obama administration made the willful decision to send them there, and they did that over my recommendation. In other words, he said, I recommended not to get involved with ISIS in Syria. And they ignored what I said, and they made a willful decision. Well, that's a powerful statement. Clearly, he burned all kinds of bridges with the establishment when he said that. And then this other general that he's made Secretary of Defense, or hopes to, this is a guy who went against the torture establishment. He's always said torture doesn't work. It doesn't work. Stop it. And he's the one who made Trump change his mind about torture. You may remember Trump was endorsing it, and this guy
absolutely.
So it looks to me like you can't judge people by their past associations. I think you can look at this general who's against the torture regime. You can look at the other general who was against involving ourselves with ISIS or sending them to Syria, and they both blew whistles. And he's got to have that kind of people, or he can't do anything.
Well, one thing that I would definitely agree with you on is that the narrative is going to change. It has to change, because the narrative that we were being fed from Obama was Hillary's narrative. Yeah. And I've always felt that Obama couldn't commit himself to fighting ISIS, that he was constantly trying to juggle between fighting ISIS and using ISIS to fight the head of Syria. And that was the problem, that he couldn't make a commitment, really. And it looks like that's going to change now. And that's at least talking about reality rather than waffling around it.
Well, he wasn't trying to fight ISIS. He was trying to pretend he was.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they didn't want to admit that they had sent ISIS there to do what we were going to do with an invasion of our own until the Russians blocked it. And of course, the British Parliament blocked it. You may remember we had Assad set up for an American invasion. We claimed he had used chemical weapons, and that crossed the line. And Obama was ready to launch this. And the British Prime Minister said, well, we'll support you. And the British Parliament said, no, we won't. We're not. That's it. And they voted it down. So that took that cover away, and the Russians stepped in and said, no, you're not going to do that. We're going to solve it diplomatically. We're going to take the weapons out of Syria and get rid of them. So that's what happened there. I don't think they ever fought ISIS. They pretend, but it's their own creation. It's what they used to overthrow Gaddafi in Libya. So they're not going to fight something they created. They succeeded in Libya. They did not succeed in Syria. So this is the whole thing. You know, the neoconservative program of world hegemony, it goes beyond Hillary. Of course, she's a part of that. But that is the agenda that we have been watching play out since 9/11. And look at the countries. There have been 7 countries that have been bombed, and droned, invaded, and there's millions of people dead, displaced, dislocated, maimed, orphaned. And I didn't remember the women marching against this. Why are they so quick to go march against Trump? But they didn't march against the slaughter of millions of women and children. So there's something very peculiar about this position of the liberal progressive left. I'm not opposed to them. I'm not opposed to reforms. I certainly don't support the wars. I don't support giving Americans jobs to people abroad and leaving them without a career here. So I haven't anything in common with the neoconservatives. I'm not sure exactly what the right wing is anymore. I assume it's the neoconservatives. But I am puzzled that everyone is so quick to go after Trump. Now, they say he's a racist because he's going to enforce immigration laws. Well, what's the president who doesn't enforce the laws? What is he? These kinds of...
I think he's going beyond just saying he's going to enforce immigration laws. He's talked about banning all Muslims from coming into the United States.
Well, Rob, let me...
And he's described Mexicans who came into the United States as rapists and murderers and things like that. There are words that he's put out that he's accountable for beyond just making the law be followed.
Well, if you look to see what people say about the Muslims, I mean, actually, we've been killing them now for 16 years, or longer, really, but really wholesale.
And that was Obama. That was Obama using drones to kill thousands of innocents.
It was Bush and Cheney, and it was Clinton. Don't forget the 500,000 dead Iraqi children that Clinton's Secretary of State said, yes, it was worth it to kill those children. Yeah. Don't forget all of this. So allegedly, all these Muslims are terrorists, you know. If you listen to the Israelis, they all have suicide belts. They're going to blow everybody up every minute. If you listen to all the propaganda against Muslims in Europe, now that they've shown up in vast numbers, they're supposed to be, you know, our enemy. They want to kill us. They don't like Christians. They don't like Jews. They're after all of us. So why are we letting in so many of them if they're so dangerous? You can't have it both ways. You can't say we've got an Islamic threat and then bring them all in the country. I mean, it's got to be one way or the other. So the policy makes sense on its face, so I can see why people would be upset about it, particularly if you've been telling Americans all these years that the Muslims are your enemy, they're terrorists, they're all terrorists. And then you see the country filling up with them, you're going to say, well, how can this be? You know, when we were at war with the Nazis, did we bring all the Nazis over here during the war and fill the country up with them? No. Remember how worried we were about a few commies during the Cold War. We had this witch hunt, McCarthy out to find a few commies here and there, as if our whole national survival depended on these. So we have a much more reason to be worried about the Muslims, because we've had more intense propaganda against them, and they're here in large numbers. So these are consequences of a policy, and anybody in office is affected by the kinds of attitudes that have been created among the public. Can I take a break 1 minute and put the cat out, because he is making a lot of noise?
Sure, I'll respond to you a little bit while you're taking care of your giant cat there. My take is that you've got some good points there. That the actions of the Democrats have killed a lot of Muslims, and but I also feel that most of the anti-Islamic rhetoric comes from the right, and it goes beyond an acceptable level of intolerance. Would you approve of banning all Muslims from entering the country?
Listen, I think the whole Muslim threat is a hoax. I think they made it up.
Who's they?
The neoconservatives.
Okay.
They made this up. You know, it's in their published documents back in the 90s. What was that thing they published in 1996? It outlined the countries that they were going to overthrow. It's the same countries that General Wesley Clark says when he went by the Pentagon, and the general showed him the memo of a list of countries we were going to overthrow, and that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah. And
so I think I think the whole Muslim threat is a hoax. I think most and practically probably all of the alleged terrorist attacks in the United States and Europe or false flag events that are orchestrated to keep the threat alive. And I think the threat was created because when the Soviet Union collapsed, the military security complex didn't have an enemy. They have a huge budget. A huge budget. It's massive. And the power and the profit from that budget is something that's very important to the military security complex. So they created the Muslim threat. And they were happy with it until it just didn't work very well for them, because it's a threat that they went to war against.
But this is a meme, a narrative that Trump is embracing, isn't it?
It's the narrative of the country. So you get a president in there, and he's going to go after the perks of the ruling establishment. I mean, do you realize what a blow he delivered when he deep-sixed the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Do you know what that partnership does? That partnership gives global corporations immunity to the laws of the countries in which they do business. That's what it does. This is a power they've lusted after forever. And he just now cut it off. This is a massive strike against the ruling establishment.
Absolutely. And I'm thrilled about it. Bernie Sanders would have done the same thing, I think, too. Hillary would have kept it. Hillary would have handed that gift over to the corporations.
That's right. Now, I'm not making any excuses. I'm just trying to explain that there are constraints on everybody. There are constraints on the president. And he can't just simply reject all of the attitudes that define the outlook of the public. He's going against some of them. And he's going against the establishment in important ways. For example, he's taking away the Russian threat, or at least that's what he says. See, the Muslim threat didn't work out well, so they recreated the Russian threat. And you've been watching them. They've been demonizing Russia for the last 3 or 4 years, right? Demonizing
mostly over Ukraine as a starting point.
But that's something Washington started.
Absolutely.
It was our coup in Kiev, not a Russian coup.
Yes.
Yeah. So they're responding to us. We were trying to grab their Black Sea naval base in Crimea.
And you and your site and my site criticized that and
Right.
exposed the real truth there, which is maybe why we were cited as Russian propaganda sites, because we criticized the policy and the narrative that was coming out of Washington.
That's right. So I just don't think we can say we have to. Look, he accepts fewer of the narratives than Obama. We already know that. He's also said we're not going to continue all these wars in the Middle East, and we're not going to impose ourselves on the rest of the world. So he's got the whole neoconservative establishment against him. You know, you're talking about the Council on Foreign Relations, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, CNN. I mean, he's by going against them, he has massive firepower arrayed against him. So I think that we have to give this some time and see. I don't think that every decision is going to be good. I don't agree with him reopening that pipeline. I think he's out to lunch on the environment, but I don't think the environmentalists are helping themselves by these fantastic attacks. You know, I'm a member of a lot of these wildlife and environmental organizations, and they all have been talking for the last 2 months about how they're going to oppose Trump. Well, they're not. They're supposed to protect wildlife and the environment, and now they're raising money to march against Trump. And I just got a notice from the National Resource Defense Council, which actually files lawsuits to stop environmental damages and doesn't just pocket the money you give them. And the whole emphasis now is on women marching against Trump. Well, this is not the way to get somebody's ear, you know, and we've seen that people can get Trump's ear. We see that he got talked out of torture. So somebody should be working on how to talk him in to protecting the environment or in doing it less damage. But when everybody goes out and jumps before anything has happened, that's not sensible. I don't, you know, my own opinion, Rob, is if he's able to do anything, what all of this attack on Trump will do will be sure there's no successor. There's no movement. And so once he's out, the establishment will overturn it all and go back to business.
You're talking about the Republican neocon establishment.
Republican, neocon, Democratic neocon. I mean, Obama was as neocon as they come. Hillary, Susan Rice, Victoria Nuland, Samantha Power. These are Russophobic, hating people. And
I just want to go over one thing. I tend to think of neocons and neoliberals, and really, I don't think there's much of a difference on Democrats or Republican sides for both of them. The neocons are into imperialism and taking over the world and dominating the world, and the neoliberals are interested in handing over the reins of power to corporations primarily. And it seems like outside of a handful of people, that's where they both are.
Yeah, well, that's why we get along so well. We see it the same way. And I just, look, you remember Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He comes in office in a time of crisis. It's very difficult for him to do anything, to achieve anything. Everybody's blocking. He finally has to threaten to pack the Supreme Court before he can get any necessary measures through to try to rectify the crisis of the Great Depression. I don't think his measures did much in rectifying the crisis, but they did put in place a framework for a more rational and less unstable financial system, like Glass-Steagall. And so some of the things that FDR got done were important, and they were important to our success in the following decades. I think, we owed a great deal to Glass-Steagall. So, but the Republicans never quit campaigning against it. And so what happens with Bill Clinton's regime? They get it overturned. And we get the fantastic financial crisis of 2007-8. So you see what Roosevelt's accomplishments were. It took the Republicans a long time, but they're turning them over. They're repealing them, and now they're after Social Security. They want to privatize Social Security. This was another great achievement of FDR. So the same thing is going to happen to Trump, except it's going to happen quicker. If we keep up all of this constant attack, at the end of 4 years, or if he makes 8 years, there's not going to be any successor or any movement to keep normal relations with Russia, to keep us from imposing our will on the rest of the world, to keep these special breaks for global corporations out of the law. All of that will be overturned. And so I think that the progressive liberal left is making a fundamental error, because they're setting up the repeal of whatever Trump is able to do, such that it happens as soon as he's out of office. And, the New Deal had some lasting power. It lasted for a while, and particularly because so many people had such memories of the Great Depression. It scarred so many millions, tens of millions of people, that it was harder to get rid of FDR's accomplishments. But
I think that it's the challenge is that the left is a very mixed bag right now, and it's not unified. I recently started a Facebook page, Take Back the Democratic Party in America, because the Democratic Party, as we know it now, was the Democratic Party that encouraged and allowed the rigging by the DNC of the primary. It allowed and encouraged the superdelegates to make a commitment 15 months before the primary vote. It encouraged and supported a mainstream media that totally supported Hillary and criticized and attacked Bernie Sanders. And I don't want any part of that Democratic Party. And there are 14 million Bernie Sanders supporters who feel the same way. And so I'm doing what I can to wake people up. Now, when I went to the Women's March on Saturday, and it was interesting because, first of all, the Breitbart is putting out the message that those marches were supported by Soros, and that's total nonsense. Now, the truth is Soros supports a lot of left-wing organizations, and they might have signed one with that march, but there was no direction, no control, no influence over the march by Soros. I don't buy that at all, and I think that's a really just unsupported claim that is just looking at a couple of different factors and putting together something that doesn't add up.
Well, I don't. But why is that important? Even if he did or didn't, I don't see what.
It's one of the. I'm just bringing it up because it's something that's come out that people are talking about. But what I did see was there were a decent amount of people there. There were people with "I'm with her" signs. There were people supporting the Russian hacking narrative, which I don't buy. I don't believe it. I know enough intelligence professionals, Ray McGovern and Bill Binney and Thomas Drake and Kurt Wyby, and I've had conversations with all of them about it, or they've written articles about it, and it's just not likely that this is the way it happened. What they're saying is that the probable way that the Podesta emails were made available to WikiLeaks is because somebody leaked to them from within the DNC. And I believe that. And I believe that this whole narrative that Russia did it is part of the Hillary Clinton campaign, which was an abject, total, incompetent failure. It's their effort to try to blame something else other than their total failure and Hillary's total failure. I just wrote an article yesterday that I published, putting the blame where I think it belongs, and that starts with...
I read that, yeah.
You read it?
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm convinced that if Bernie Sanders had won, there would be better people in the government. But they may not be strong enough to do anything.
Yeah, that's something I want to get back to. You say that Trump needs to support strong people, and that I assume means he needs to support these people who are billionaires and people who were heads of big operations. You
know, Rob, the advantage of a billionaire is he doesn't need anything, so he can stand up. The advantage of somebody who is not rich, who's in a job like that, standing up prevents you from getting rich. When I was in the government, everybody wanted to be in the government in order to get rich. There were a few of us who wanted to help the president. As a consequence, we didn't get rich. So don't, just because they're a billionaire, that's an advantage if you want to have somebody that will stand with the president and do these changes that are not in the interest of the ruling elite. And you got to have knowledgeable people. I don't like Goldman Sachs, but if you were a young guy in finance, you'd be glad to start off with Goldman Sachs. It's kind of like the entry level. It's like the blue ribbon entry into that world. So I know a lot of people who work for, well, not a lot. I know some people who work for Goldman Sachs, like Nomi Prinz, managing director. She's been on the banks for years, All the President's Bankers is the name of her last book. She exposes them. I know other people who've been in Wall Street, like Pam Martins. She's after the Wall Street.
So basically what you're saying is you're hoping that some of the billionaires that he's appointed will, because of their ability to be so independent, act like Pam Martins and Nomi Prinz.
Or support what he says he wants to do.
It's an interesting perspective. I call the show Bottom Up Radio because I think that most change happens from the bottom up, but you're saying from the ultra top, change can also be made.
Well, FDR made some changes.
That's true.
Some important ones. I think change can happen both ways. It's harder from the top because usually the ruling elite has control. And what we see happening with Trump is a break in that control. At least the elite thinks that, or they wouldn't be attacking him so hard.
Now, you wrote an article recently, Trump's declaration of war. Talk a little bit about how that ties in with what you're just bringing up.
Well, the things that he has emphasized, with the exception of the environment, are totally against the ruling elite's interest. He's saying he's taking away the enemy that justifies the military security complex annual budget of $1,000 billion. That he says we're not going to impose ourselves on the rest of the world. This is a complete, total rejection of the now entrenched neoconservative doctrine that has controlled our foreign policy since Bill Clinton. They tried to take over the Reagan administration, the neoconservatives, and they did some damage, but they all got fired and prosecuted. In fact, a lot of them would be in jail, except they were pardoned by George Herbert Walker Bush in the next administration.
Who?
Well, it's a huge number. I've written this many times. It's all over my site. All kinds of top-level CIA people, executives. The guy who was Assistant Secretary of State. They were even going to put Weinberger, the Secretary of Defense. All of these people, there was a huge number of them that were convicted of a lot of them for lying to Congress, for withholding information. They were convicted in relation to the Iran-Contra business, the Nicaraguan thing. What was the Assistant Secretary of State? He's one of the ruling neocons today. He was convicted, and he got pardoned by
Libby. Are you talking about Scooter Libby?
No, I'm talking about. There's so many names. If you don't use them every day, you forget them. But he was Assistant Secretary of State in the Reagan administration. He was convicted by the Reagan administration, and but a lot of them were. I have written this over and over. If I had time, I'd go grab one of my books and find it and read it to you. I've written many times naming who they are, what they were convicted of. It's all on my website. It's
okay. Say your website. What's your website?
It's just paulcraigroberts.org.
Okay. paulcraigroberts.org.
paulcraigroberts.org. But just Google. And you'll get it. All this stuff will come up.
What should they search? What should they Google search?
Well, listen, what would you do? You would say Iran-Contra convictions during the Reagan administration. Or you could do pardons, neoconservative pardons.
Uh-oh. Have we lost you?
Pardons or CIA pardons. I just got a message that said the internet is unstable, internet connection. Remember, two of the guys convicted were national security advisors.
National security advisors.
Poindexter was convicted. National security advisors, two of them were. Remember Poindexter? He was convicted, as well as I remember. And there was another national security advisor convicted. There was a number of CIA executives. I don't mean just agents in the field. I mean, guys way up in the management. And they're all named. They're all there. I don't know exactly how we got off on this.
Yeah, let's move on. Let's move on. Yeah, I wanted to get your take a little bit more. We kind of glanced over it, but what's your take on the last presidential election process, from the primaries on through the general election, in terms of the candidates, the parties, the media, the electoral college system?
Well, I think that from the beginning, the ruling establishment regarded Trump as a threat. They didn't see anybody else as a threat, maybe Bernie. But I don't think they thought Bernie was tough enough to do anything. He would have changed the rhetoric, and they wouldn't even like it. So we saw from the very beginning the media, which is concentrated and serves the elite. The media is what helps the elite control the explanations given to people. They were all over Trump. They did everything they could to demonize him, to deny him the nomination. It didn't work. And then they repeated this in the general election. And it didn't work. And I think that what we saw with both parties is that they didn't have any candidates. The Republican candidates weren't any good for the people. Any of them, I think, would have been acceptable to the elites. I don't think Sanders was acceptable to the elites, but I don't think they regarded him as a threat. He's not.
That's because the Democrats had such a grip on the whole election process.
Yeah, well, no, I know that. But I mean, if he had gotten in office, I don't think they regarded him as a threat because I don't think they regarded him strong enough
Okay.
go against them. But Trump is a different. Maybe they're wrong, but they're clearly convinced that Trump is not under their control and not likely to be under their control.
I think that the way to control Trump is to figure him out and go with his ego and his narcissism and his thin-skinnedness, which is the way I think that people are going to get him to respond or not respond.
Well, I think that what he's up against, even though the Congress is Republican, the House and Senate are majority Republican, all of them, not just the Republicans, but the Republicans and the Democrats, they're all still in the hands of the ruling elite. Because
I agree. I totally agree.
Come from the elite. They're not Trump people. This is not a Trump movement in power in the Congress.
What would that look like? What would a Trump movement in Congress look like?
Well, it would be something where you had been campaigning for a number of years. You had been building supporters. You had been selling your agenda. You had been engaged in discussions and arguments and debates about the direction that the country would be going in the different areas. And you would know who the people were who understood the situation that you could put in power to serve your agenda. And the same sort of thing would have impacted the congressional elections. So you would have people elected to the House who were, if Trump is the person, who were Trump people. You'd have people elected in the Senate who were Trump people.
What would they look like? I mean, I don't see any of that so far. There's
not any. That's what I'm saying. There's not any of it, and that's.
But what would they look like? What would a Trump person running for Congress or the Senate look like?
Well, it would be somebody independent of the ruling establishment, not dependent on their campaign contributions, who understood that offshoring the American jobs did not give us a new economy. It gave us a poor economy. It wrecked the ladders of upward mobility. It destroyed middle-class income jobs. They would know that. They would know that the consequence was the destruction of many formerly economically strong cities and states who now have substantial budget problems, who have trouble with their pensions to their retired workers. There would be people aware of this who think that it's a problem more important than invading Syria or getting in a fight with Russia or anything like that. So,
it seems like you're describing somebody who's more of a libertarian.
No, I think these are going to be people who are prepared to use government power to change things. Just like Roosevelt was prepared to use government power to change things. I don't think these would be libertarians. I think these would be people who say, hey, we understand the problems and we think that it's our job to deal with them and not to ignore them and go off on some other agenda that benefits a small handful of people. I mean, who benefited from the wars?
Yeah. When I think about Rand Paul and Ron Paul, I think that they have similar approaches to Trump in many ways.
Their approach is that government in general is not good. It's not trustworthy. You need less of it. Trump is saying what the government has been doing is not good. And we're not going to have any more of it. we're going to make the government serve the people. He's not saying, I'm going to take away all the power of government. He's simply saying, I'm going to stop the way government is using power to serve a handful of people. And I'm going to make the government serve people.
I hope you're right. I don't see that with what he's just decided with Keystone or with the.
If he looks at Keystone, he sees jobs, he sees energy independence, he sees those kinds of things. Whether or not it's worth the cost of what it can do to the environment, I don't think he's looking at.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Well, let me move on because we don't have that much more time, and I want to kind of cover this. So to recap, you're very hopeful about Trump, that he's going to take on the establishment, that he's bringing in powerful, independent people who can actually do something without worrying about what they're going to do next in their next job. So what advice would you give to the left, to Democrats, for 2018 and 2020 to get real change happen that would be the kind of change that progressives, not neoliberal Democrats like we have now, but real progressive change? How would you see, what would you advise them?
I would say get off his back until he fails, or until he does, or until he proves he's a fake. If he's just another fake, we'll know it sooner enough, and then we can get on his back. I'll be there too. But I think it's a mistake to start owning when, first of all, look, he's a godsend in the fact that he says, I don't see the point of conflict with the Russians. I don't see the point of NATO 25 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So this is the most important thing in my mind about Trump, that he is putting space between us and thermonuclear war. And the way the Obama-Hillary regime was doing it, they were pushing right toward that war. You can't continually threaten a country like Russia and expect nothing to happen.
But he is ratcheting things up with China. He's taking them down with Russia, moving them up with China. But my question is, okay, so the Democrats should back off, give him a little space, let him make some failures, and give him a little time. What else could they do?
Yeah, I think they should. Well, look, they can't do anything because they're owned, like the Republicans. The Congress is owned by the interest groups that fund their campaigns. So
true. Totally true.
They're caught in that. That's the difference between them and Trump.
There's a conversation saying that what the left needs to do is create its own version of the Tea Party to take over and take back the Democratic Party.
No, I think what Trump says is the working man has been ignored, neglected, and is suffering. And this has to stop. That's what Trump said. So he has the original agenda of the left wing, which is to stand for the working man. The first article I wrote was the working man won the election. Because
we'll see. We'll see. I have.
Well, what do you think when he's going against these trade deals that move their jobs offshore?
Yeah, I'm all for that. That was a very good sign.
He's standing for the working man, and he has stood against the risk of war with Russia. Now, I don't know what all this attack on China is. I suspect it's just a way of shifting the focus off of Russia to make it easier for him to normalize those relations. And in other words, if he goes out and tells the military security complex, you're not going to have any enemies. You're not Russia, not China, not Iran, not Syria. They're not going to tolerate that. The Congress will be in an uproar. Everybody will say, see, we told you he's a Russian agent. He's making peace with them. He's a Russian agent. He's making peace. See, we told you. I mean, sometimes if you want to get a little direction here, you got to kind of say, okay, I'll get this guy over here instead, just to be able to move forward. You know, it's not easy to take away the Russian threat from the military security complex. This is the key to their power and their budget. So is he going to also take away all the other threats? So what do we need the Pentagon for? What do we need CIA for? What do we need this for? What do we need Lockheed Martin, Marietta, or Boeing? You don't need them. So, Eisenhower warned us about the military-industrial complex over a half century ago.
Yep.
Nothing was done about it. Well, just imagine how entrenched they are now. You know, they've had all these years, a half a century, to be just completely entrenched. That's not something that you can just push away. I mean, he's taken on entrenched, established, powerful interest groups. A lot of people don't expect him to survive.
I was not surprised when he went and visited the CIA as one of his first gestures as president, because there's a lot of talk that his criticism of the CIA puts him at the same kind of risk that John Kennedy was at.
Yeah, probably more. He's probably a bigger threat. Did you notice, though, that he said he may have to build them a bigger room without columns? Did you catch what it means without columns? He means without the CIA fifth column undermining his government. That's what he was telling them.
Well, let's talk about Comey and his role in the election. What's your take on the CIA and the election?
Well, the CIA was doing everything they could to elect Hillary. All these the accusations John Brennan made, no evidence, none whatsoever. All these public denunciations, even after the election of the president-elect, all this crap, this report, this bogus report, the 35-page dossier. This is absurdity. I can't understand how anything like this could even happen.
I got the impression, though, that Comey helped Trump when he did his last-minute thing. No?
I don't. Look, Comey didn't have anything to do with it. What hurt Hillary was the content of the emails.
Yes.
Not whether or not she gets investigated or indicted, which she didn't. Is the content of the emails. That's what the Sanders people are upset about. That's what the right wing's upset about because of all the violations of national security protocols. A lot of those guys you say you talk to, a lot of them have been prosecuted for doing far less than Hillary.
Yes.
They put Kirkju in jail. They tried to put Benny in jail. They beat up Ray McGovern several times when he stands up just to ask a question.
To Hillary. Yes.
Yeah. So, I think that it's a mistake to judge in advance of actions. And it's like Trump said right after the election, he said, there's not anybody to appoint except the insiders. There's nobody else. He's right. There's not anybody.
I want to dig a little deeper with our conversation about what the left should do. Because your first response is give them some space. 6 months out, a year out, we're starting to look at the 2018 midterm elections. Any thoughts about that?
I think if the Democratic Party doesn't want to go extinct, it's going to have to align with the working class. So it's going to have to support Trump. It's going to have to say, look, he says he wants to help the working man, the working families, the people who have been dispossessed by the financial system and the offshoring jobs.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the Democrats are going to support Trump. But what it could mean is that they go further than Trump in supporting the working class, which would be a big leap for them. And they're sure not doing it right now. They have sold out the working class. Yeah. Chuck Schumer is a classic example of it with his attitude towards unions and workers. It was obscene, the approach that he took to it.
Yeah. You know, let me tell you something that will interest you. Years ago, I think it was around 2004, I had been making a lot of complaints about the jobs offshoring, because everybody else was saying, oh, this is good for America. We're going to get better jobs. We're going to, all this crap, you know, they were putting out all this. And I kept hammering it, hammering. I got called up one day. Senator Schumer, he says, look, it was around Christmas. He said, let's you and I write an op-ed for the New York Times to come out right after New Year's about this jobs offshoring. We got to do something about it. It's destroying the working class. And so I said, okay, son, I'll be glad to do that. And his AA or whoever it was at the time managed the drafts going back and forth. And we came up with something, and sure enough, it was in the New York Times right after New Year's.
Cool.
Caused a sensation, because here is Reagan and a Democratic New York senator saying the country faced a fundamental problem because of this jobs offshoring and justifying it as free trade. And so the thing was seen as an attack on free trade, because they thought that's what jobs offshoring was. They thought it was free trade. And so, you know what happened? Boy, instantly, the Brookings Institution calls a conference. And Schumer and I get summoned to come explain ourselves to the neoliberals. So we go, and there's C-SPAN, it's broadcast live. And Schumer and I just tore them to shreds. And C-SPAN rebroadcast and rebroadcast and rebroadcast this thing. And it went everywhere.
No, wait, I couldn't hear I couldn't make out the word. You told them to stretch?
No, we just tore them up.
Oh.
They couldn't, you know, they were going to confront us, but they didn't have the firepower. So Schumer and I won the debate, and this came on C-SPAN, who rebroadcast the program a number of times, you know, live, but then a number of times. Well, shortly after that, he said, we got to do another one. And I said, all right. And then it went dead, completely dead. And the next thing I knew, he was pulling back out of it. And I think what happened, the New York financial community had a talk to him and said, this is a no-no.
Well, they own Schumer.
This is how we get profits. We take the American job at $25 an hour. We take it to China for $1 an hour, and we put $24 an hour in our pocket.
Yep.
Shut up. And that's what happened. So he wanted to do something, and we tried. He even got together with a Reaganite. But it went dead because the interest groups said, not if you're going to be a New York senator, you're not going to talk like this.
Yeah.
So this is the sort of thing Trump is up against.
So one thing that I'm hearing is that the only way that Bernie Sanders type candidates running for Senate or the House are going to make it is if they don't depend on the same kind of money that Schumer depends on. They're going to have to do for the House and Senate candidates like Bernie did and get the money in small donations of $27 each.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, I think Chris Hedges has concluded that reform is impossible, only revolution. And I don't know exactly how he got to that conclusion, but probably it's because of the power of campaign money. Because the interests have the campaign money, so they have the Congress. Normally, they have the president too, and they have the courts. So how do you get reform when the reforms aren't in the interest of the oligarchs that control the government?
It seems to me like one thing that's missing is the voice for the people who voted for Trump because he's anti-establishment. I don't see them showing up on the media. I don't see them doing anything. And I think that there's a challenge, because I think that Trump is going to be automatically communicating with the establishment Republicans, the establishment media, and that I don't know that there's anybody there leading the crowd of people who voted Trump in, who want him to make these changes. And somehow I think that's important, and it's being neglected.
Yeah, oh, you're right, Rob. And of course, the establishment will wear him down if they can. They'll wear him down a lot. On the other hand, because of Clinton, Bush, and Obama, there's a lot of authority now in the White House that didn't used to be there.
Yeah, I think they're going to start kicking. They're already started kicking butt and taking no prisoners, and it's going to be interesting and probably very frustrating for some of us. And but also, you know, I'm thrilled what he did with TPP, and I just hope that we'll see some more surprises from him out there of actually taking on the establishment. Do you see have any other examples you think that'll happen soon?
Well, I assume taking out TCP means also the transatlantic version will go. I think the most important thing, again, I want to stress this, we were being pushed into dangerous conflict with Russia. Thermonuclear weapons are not like the little bitty atomic bombs we dropped on Japan. They're massive, powerful, destructive things. And if you can stop that conflict from developing any further, this is a huge contribution to humanity. I mean, that's enough to justify his presidency, if he can just normalize relations with Russia. I don't know how much attention you paid, but Putin, I paid very close attention. Putin has stressed over and over and over that you are pushing us to war, and when I tell you, you don't listen.
Yeah, I see it.
At least a half a dozen times. What do we got to do to make you realize that you're leading us into war? It's going to be the end, and you don't hear me when I tell you. This is the most serious thing that I can think of. It's far more serious than women's rights or transgender rights or racism or anything else, because it's supreme. There's no world here. There's nothing else to worry about.
And among the people who were on the left who didn't vote for Hillary, this is one of the things that they voiced the most, that kept a warmonger out, kept somebody who was likely to raise the heat so much between Russia that it could have been a real problem.
That's right. Yeah. This, I think, is the greatest contribution. And I think if he can do anything about restoring the ladders of upward mobility that made the United States an opportunity society, you know, you had a situation where people could rise up, they could be poor, they could get middle-class manufacturing jobs. They could be poor, they could go to universities, get training, they could come out and be professionals. All those jobs, or most of them, have been lost. I don't know how much you follow just the economic stuff, but the vast majority of the jobs that have been created in the last 10 years are part-time. They're jobs that will not support the formation.
Low-paid, part-time.
Yeah, they won't support the formation of a household. There are actually more people aged 24 to 34 living at home with their parents than there are living independently.
I know all about that. I have one.
Well, it's not It's not the fault. The fault is the global corporations that move the jobs offshore. And then say, oh, and there's not enough software engineers, so we got to bring in all these people from India on H-1B work permits. And so the American software engineers can't get jobs. I know a dozen of them. Some of them hadn't had a job in 10 years. So, you know, if he can do something there, then that's the second great achievement. He would rank, in my view, as our greatest president. He normalizes relations with Russia, and he can return a middle class to existence. That is, these ladders of upward mobility, they have been taken down by globalism. They're not there now. If you can put those back, these are two huge achievements. You know, I have stressed all the time against all the Reagan haters. He did two things. He stopped the stagflation, and he stopped the Cold War. So give him some credit. What else could you expect? Who else did anything like that? Nobody. So if Trump can restore normal relations with Russia, stop this warmongering, and do something to help people get good jobs again, he's a hero. He's Trump the Great. Whatever else he does or says doesn't really matter. If we get these wars, we get people with hope again. I mean, how do you think a guy feels? He's gone to college, he's got huge student debt, and he can't get a job. Or how does the girl feel? Or the woman? You're not supposed to use girl. How does the young woman feel? How do they feel? They have to still be at home with parents. Or how do they feel that they can't get married and start families? They can't buy a house.
I wonder, you know, these are the kinds of things that Democrats are supposed to get behind.
They are, right.
And I wonder if the Republicans will get behind them.
No.
That leaves an opening for the Democrats. It does. We'll support Trump in these issues. And that, I don't know if they can handle that.
But you see, this is why I say this is the chance. I mean, he has the inclinations that used to be associated with Democrats, not for a long time. But, you know, peace and bread.
Sorry, I got a phone call. I got to turn on the do not disturb.
Okay. Peace and bread. Peace and bread.
Peace and bread.
Well, this is what the Democrats used to be. Not for a long time have they been, because they got sold on being like Republicans. And
by the Clintons, mostly by the Clintons, I'd say.
What was that neoliberal economic group that formed up in Washington and was influential with the Clintons? And they're the ones who said, look, we need to get into this corporate world too. We need
Democratic Leadership Council, the DLC.
Yeah, I often wondered, were they set up by the Koch brothers? Because that's what they achieved. Yeah. They turned the Democratic Party into another Republican Party.
That's fascinating. Well, I think we've hit right around our time frame. So anything you want to wrap up with?
No, I've enjoyed talking to you. You're a reasonable guy, and I'm pleased that you post my columns on your site.
I'm always happy to. I don't always agree, but most of the time.
It doesn't matter. We need thought. We need to think. We need to have more than these sort of dogmatic responses. You know?
All right. So thanks so much. Much appreciated. And again, this is Rob Kall.
I appreciate all the efforts that you make. I do. I appreciate your efforts. I think your heart's in the right place, and you're the kind of guy we need.
Well, thank you. And it's a team effort at OpEd News. You know, I have to do a shout out to Sheila Samples and Scott Baker and Butler in particular, our managing editors. They do an amazing job, and Sheila is devoted to you.
I couldn't do without Sheila.
She's awesome.
Yeah, she's awesome.
So it's the Rob Kall Bottom Up Show. going to be doing video now. So check it out at YouTube. And if you're looking for more of the radio shows, you can go to iTunes and look for my name, Rob Kall, Kall. You'll find at least 100 of them there. And see you soon. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Paul.
All right, Rob.
Bye.
Now, all of this app stays on